the demand remains strong. The willingness from corporate buyers to engage in PPA contracts remains strong. And from the developer side, although they have challenges in their supply chain and cost of their components, there's also a great deal of uncertainty there. They're also willing to transact, and they are acting rationally and hoping to capture some more of that near-term high revenue that's available in the wholesale market. And that's where the meat of the negotiations take place at the moment, is how do you sort of allocate and make everybody happy with the current market situations.
Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome to Energy Unplugged. Today we will be discussing long-term green power purchase agreements, or commonly known as PPAs. I'm Thekla von Bülow, Principal for Commission Projects at Aurora's Berlin office and heading up Aurora's PPA project activities. My guest on the show today is from Denmark, but has opted for a warmer climate for a couple of years now, living in Madrid, Spain. He started off his career in banking before transitioning to the energy industry and has become an energy market expert for power purchase agreements. He has a background in wholesale market trading and management of risk portfolios for corporates. He was responsible for energy procurement and implementation of an RE100 strategy for a large chemical company, and has more recently been a lead business developer and originator of offshore wind PPAs for the Danish utility Orsted. He is now the Vice President of Europe of LevelTen, a provider of renewable transaction infrastructure. And with his background, he knows LevelTen's business from all sides, selling, buying and investing in renewable energy. My guest on the show today to discuss current trends on power purchase agreements is Flemming Sørensen, Vice President LevelTen. Welcome back to the show, Flemming.
Thank you very much, Thekla. That was a very lengthy and comprehensive introduction. A guy growing up in northwestern part of Denmark is not used to such introduction. So thank you very much for that. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Great to have you on the show today. So as our listeners have different level of power market expertise, would you be able to really very generally explain what PPAs are, and especially also what the role of LevelTen is in this whole space?
Sure. At least I'll give it a go. So when we think of a PPA, a power purchase agreement, it's actually not as complicated as people might think it is. We have in the basic idea two stakeholders. We have a buyer of electricity that is interested in obtaining the green benefits and the additionality claim, so the strongest sustainability claim that you can sort of imagine, and they want to engage with a pre-construction renewable asset. And on the other side, we have a developer of such projects that are looking for a stable cash flow to go demonstrate to their bank or other financiers that here's a viable business case. So please give me some money so I can go build the project. And so the two parties agree to exchange power and renewable energy credits for money, and that's really the basic idea behind a PPA. And then we could spend all day talking about all the peculiarities of how that contract ultimately gets done, and how long it takes, and how complex it is to allocate the different risks inside such a contract. But let's not spend the entire program on that for now. And so maybe to elaborate on LevelTen's role. So we provide what we think of as transaction infrastructure for the renewable energy industry. And what does that mean? It means that we want to help transactions become better and faster and safer and more transparent for everybody involved. And so we built two marketplaces. We've built an energy marketplace that we'll talk about today, where we where we manage PPAs. And then we have an asset marketplace where you can basically do facilitate a similar transactions, but instead of focusing on selling the energy from a project in the form of a PPA, you can transact for the entire project. So we have in our energy marketplace, or our PPA marketplace, if you will, we've collected offers and real data from projects around Europe and the US that has a price point at which the sellers are willing to engage a conversation with a buyer. And we show that information to the buyer community, which consists of corporates and energy companies, and increasingly also corporates through our broad network of sustainability advisors. They come and take a look in the platform, and they can see, and I think we think it's a user-friendly format. They can get an instant view of where are opportunities available and what do they look like in terms of price and or value and COD and all of these types of things. So that's the platform approach that we're trying to bring to this market to help increase liquidity and transparency for everybody that wants to interact in this market.
Yeah, thank you. And so kind of just to summarize, PPAs, especially for the industrials and corporates of the world, are one tool to actually get direct access to green power, in combination also with guarantees of origin, and they use it as one of the pillars for the European decarbonisation efforts. Now, LevelTen is actually quite new to Europe. So you've been the incumbent renewable transaction infrastructure platform in the US, and you've expanded the business to Europe over the last 2 years. Why was this the right time to move the business or expand the business to Europe? And what has been your experience working on the European markets over the last years?
Whether it was the right time is always easier to discuss looking back, because it has been a very interesting and extremely dynamic past couple of years. But when is there ever a right time? I think we came at a point in time when we felt the market was maturing, right? So we had been in the US, and we had seen the PPA market grow and evolve and become a relatively liquid market for these types of transactions. And Europe was seeing, through sort of 17, 18, 19, single handfuls of transactions were possibly being made. And we felt maybe now is the time to bring this type of platform approach and collect offers in many different markets so that we can help accelerate the transaction process, make it more visible to buyers where opportunities exist, and also help expand the access to more and more corporates to activate themselves in offsite corporate renewable procurement. We came driven by customer demand, right? So we had US partners and customers that wanted to execute transactions in Europe, and they would like to do it on through a similar process that we had built for them, and they utilized in the US, and that was the primary driver. And since then, in the past 2 years, it's been quite a journey, to be honest. I started by myself for about 8 months until we started building out the team, and we're now a team of 7 in Madrid, and we've had a lot to learn, right? The platform initially, and I mean this in the best possible way when I say this, was made in America, right? And made possibly also for the American market, of course. So we had to do some adaptation that goes into, language and some of the questions that we were asking developers and all these type of things. There was definitely a period where we had to learn a lot about how Europe would, better embrace the offerings of LevelTen. Building penetration across the developer community is key and vital for us, and we are not at the same place yet as we are in the US, but we're certainly working, and we're getting closer every day. The same is the case for what we call our sort of Accelerate Partnership Network. where we offer consultancies the opportunity to come and use LevelTen's transaction tools to service its customers. So we've been working for the past many months to build out those relationships and really establish ourselves as the market where supply want to be, because they know buyers are there, and buyers want to be there because they know supply is there. So you can argue how far we are in that strategy, but that's ultimately the aim that we aim to bring to the market to help build, as I said before, liquidity and transparency to this market. A couple of differences that I think we noticed along the way has been that European actors are more, I don't know if this is the right way, but they transact slightly more sophisticated in terms of the origination and structuring of deals that is possible. So there's some fundamental market differences that make that possible, but there's also a mindset that is really solution oriented in how you share and allocate the risks among parties. So we've been pleasantly surprised by that, and we've adapted the platform to be able to accommodate other type of contracting structures and pricing models than what we typically see in the US. Whereas Europe started with particular demand for physical PPAs, and there are a few reasons for that, we are now seeing that the virtual or the cross-border PPA structure is gaining a significant momentum, and without getting into too much of the weeds there's a trade-off in terms of what you can do in either contract structure and the complexity that they bring to the table. So I think that's been an interesting journey as well in terms of the contracts. When we talk about maybe supply and demand, that's ultimately something we care a lot about as we try to become a marketplace of choice. We're seeing very significant and diversified demand across, government targets, EU targets, utilities, and obviously the voluntary market. So corporates that are looking to satisfy their sustainability targets, as you outlined before. And one thing, we can maybe touch on that later, but one thing that's become more apparent is that there's an additional driver that is becoming increasingly visible is the need to hedge electricity costs, and that's sort of adding to corporate demand at the moment. On the supply side, we think the PPA supply growth is a bit sluggish and maybe struggling a little bit to keep up with demand, but hopefully that will rectify itself in coming years. But regulatory permitting and similar challenges have been limiting the construction of new assets, at least to the speed at which most developers would like to proceed. There's a great deal of uncertainty related to component costs and construction costs and interconnection costs in many markets, and then I guess there's also there's no situation that's so bad that it's not good for something. So the elevated price level in wholesale markets have brought a new and strong merchant appetite from the ultimate investors and owners of renewable assets, which sometimes means that they actually don't need to sign a PPA to go build the project, as I otherwise explained in the very beginning. So that's also a bit of a damper maybe on PPA supply. At least they if they do choose to sell a PPA, they want to get paid pretty for it. So I know. So we lots of learnings over the past couple of years of how this market is super dynamic, and we're trying to do our best to adapt the platform and to make sure that we can act as fast as the market requires, and our partners that use our tools can capture opportunities as they are presented. And yeah, I guess the good news is that there are still opportunities, and there's still a lot of deals being made despite challenges, if you will, on both sides. So yeah, we're quite optimistic about staying here, of course, for for the long run, but also how the market will evolve over the next few years.
Yeah, thanks, Flemming. Really interesting. I mean, you covered a lot already. I think in summary, it's fair to say that the European market is much less mature than the US market, which has been very active much earlier than the European market. European market really has picked up since 2018, in my perspective, really also driven by the increased interest and demand from large corporates, starting off with the technology companies or the big consumer companies, but now also more and more what I would call kind of the price hedgers coming into the system, really looking for long-term contracts as a hedging tool against rising power prices. So certainly a very dynamic movement on the demand side. I agree with you on the supply side. I mean, some of the hurdles have been lifted in the last couple of years in terms of renewable build out. Subsidy schemes have been lifted in some countries, which enables more kind of the PPA market to pick up. And trends that you just mentioned around virtual PPAs certainly is a sign that the market is slowly maturing. It becomes a much more common tool in Europe for market participants. They are building up the knowledge, and virtual PPAs as really a financial derivative rather than a physical power delivery is a sign that people become more familiar with the market. We'll talk about the high power prices currently and how this is affecting the PPA market for now. But first of all, I'd like to kind of dig a bit deeper into Europe, because we're talking about the European PPA market, but in effect, the European markets are actually really different, both in terms of their national energy policies, the power mix, the market players that are active in the different markets. Right. So could you break it down a little bit for me? So what are the incumbent PPA markets? Where is the market most liquid? And what kind of emerging PPA markets have you seen in the last couple of years since you've been active in Europe?
Yeah, no, I'd love to do that. And then I hope you will chime in if you disagree and you see something different on your end, right? We've had some pretty clear signals when so maybe just to explain how the platform works when we talk about helping corporates find PPA opportunities. So we would typically distribute what we call a demand signal or a request for proposal to the network of developers that we work with, and we have about 600 of those across North America and Europe, and where applicable, they will review the specification that the corporate has set for their procurement appetite. So what we then collect are fresh and tailored offers to that specific demand signal, and we can analyze that data and help the corporate decide what is a better opportunity than the others. So in that work, we typically would get most responses from the Nordic region and Spain, and at least previous until sort of the new market boundary rule for AIB versus non-AIB countries kicked in last year. We also had a lot of people with big load in the UK that were looking in that market, and I think we still see that, right? I think those are still the markets where a lot of transactions are executed. Maybe the Nordics were the first movers a few years ago, where I think Google, one of the first people to do a big PPA in Finland, and then sort of a lot of stuff has been going on in both Sweden, Finland, and also Denmark since then. And similarly in Spain, when it sort of took off back in 1819. Since then, we've seen a number of transactions, and transactions here. I talk both about corporate offtake agreements directly from a renewable asset, but also indeed utility offtake from a similar asset. So lots of activity in those markets. We've seen a lot of interest in in Poland for a couple of reasons. One reason is there's a lot of companies that have manufacturing load there, and there's a very high carbon factor to benefit from if you're actually able to do a project inside Poland. It's in sort of the same situation as now the UK. It's outside of the AIB scope, so you have to do sort of an in-country engagement to have the highest amount of impact from that market. But definitely there's a lot of interest, and similar to other places, prices have taken off, and it's been a little tricky. The national auction have swallowed a lot of projects, and there's it's not possible really to build wind in large scale. I know they are relaxing the H10 or the 10H rule, but still it's not a super big wind market. So it's been primarily solar, and that's actually a bit, that's maybe for another section, but the opportunities we see are primarily solar driven, because it is very difficult to build new wind, say outside of territories, with very low density in population. So maybe northern Sweden or Finland, and some places other, of course. But I think we have maybe 80 to 90% of the offers we have in Europe are solar, and only 10% are wind. So there's a big discrepancy, or big advantage to solar.
And one of the main kind of reasons behind or the supply side of PPAs is always looking how actually the subsidy schemes in the different European countries. So you mentioned Spain, which didn't have much of a subsidy scheme for solar build out in the last couple of years, and they introduced it around 1.5 years ago, which was kind of a game changer for the PPA market, because suddenly you had an alternative to PPAs, if not looking at merchant, and that is affecting the PPA supply side. And the same goes for the Nordics, obviously, where the subsidy schemes have been poor in that sense for a couple of years now, and that really gives room to a market driven build out in combination with PPAs. I do also see a lot of interest in Poland. I think also very much demand side driven. There's a lot of international players active in Poland that are looking for local decarbonisation. So for me, especially, the interest here is on the demand side, and it will be interesting to see whether enough projects will be available to cover this demand. Poland, for me, is one of the countries that will be undersupplied in PPAs for the next coming years, even though, as you mentioned, the 10H rule, so the distance rule for the buildup of renewables, especially onshore wind, might be a bit of a game changer here as well, in providing additional projects in the market. So kind of little policy changes on paper, I would say, can have quite a significant impact on how the PPA markets develop, and how big the role of PPAs will be for the renewable build-outs in the different countries, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with that. And by the way, thank you for again explaining some of the language that I just throw out there, and without explaining what it means. And so I'm happy that you pick it up and help the audience understand what we're talking about. I think in terms of, so where supply was very significant across the Nordics and Spain a year ago, that supply is smaller, but it's still very attractive places to be. And if we talk about what are other places or newer markets that we're seeing interest in across Europe, I think there are a couple that I want to highlight, and we can talk more about that. And one is Italy, right? We've had a lot of interest in Italian projects over the past couple of years, they demonstrate, pretty good value, and there's a good opportunity for the buyer in Italy. There's some things to be mindful of in terms of managing the, you fill up Sicily with solar, and there's no way to export that power from Sicily. The solar capture price ultimately will become lower and lower. So there's some cannibalization issues to consider, but generally it's a very interesting market, and we have been witnessing these permitting issues or delays in getting projects through the permitting queues for a very long time now, and there are new initiatives and a new task force put in place to try and speed that up and get projects faster through the queue. So hopefully we'll see more, let's say, realistic supply being demonstrated from Italy in the next couple of years. That would be very exciting. We're starting to see a lot of interest in Greece, and that's actually both from the development side, but also from the offtake side. And we're in the middle of negotiating the first PPA that we would potentially do in Greece if it ultimately gets signed. So excited to see that resource being fulfilled. And I guess there are other southeastern European countries, Hungary one, maybe Bulgaria, and further up north from there that is exciting, and maybe a few years behind, but certainly we're starting to see activity in those markets too. And then a couple of big ones that we should touch on that everybody has a lot of interest in, which might be Germany and France. And there are some regulatory barriers that have made those markets, from a pricing perspective, less interesting from the voluntary off-taker, as most of the projects that have been developed there has been comfortably seated under a nice subsidy scheme, where then the guarantee of origin or the green benefit was not able to be exported to the corporate. There's so much interest in Germany at the moment, a new regulation, and you can help us understand this. So we do expect great things from the German market going forward, and we have a lot of customers that would love to see better opportunities to tap into new renewables in Germany. But what do you think about that? How do you see the same, or what is your perception?
Yeah, Germany's an interesting one, and especially given that Germany has this very special case of currently not providing guarantees of origin for subsidized assets, making the GO market quite scarce for the amount of industry that Germany has. And so PPAs in that sense are the only tool to actually get access to guarantees of origin with for high quality green power with high additionality and local and time correlation, which are basically kind of the three criterions that you would be looking for to certify your high quality green power procurement. And so, of course, all these industry players, again, starting with the technology companies, but a lot of players coming in, looking for projects, looking even for baseload projects, which is an additional complexity in Germany. And so we do expect the German market to remain undersupplied. Quite a big game changer could come through the Renewable Energy Directive 3 out of the European Union, which is advocating that all European green generated power should receive guarantees of origin, which would mean that German power would also have to issue guarantees of origin if it was on a subsidy scheme. However, there is further adjustments on a national level that would be required in order for the industry really to be able to use these guarantees of origin from a subsidized asset, which is the prohibition of the double marketing of green power, the Doppelvermarktungsverbot in Germany. So this is something that will further be needed to adapt and could make the German market much more relaxed in the next coming years. On the other markets that you mentioned, Italy, I do see a lot of interest in Italy in that sense, but quite regionally focused, I would say. So kind of interest in Sardinia and Sicily, as you mentioned, Italy kind of being split in different price zones also. So just talking about Italy itself is probably, as for the EU as a whole, likely to generalize it too much. And Southeastern. Yes, and Southeastern Europe, fully agree with you. There are certainly markets to watch. Fully agree on Hungary, where it seems that the PPAs are a good tool for developers to get around quite complicated subsidy schemes and enable the build out that they're looking for in those countries. So lots of interest in these different markets, with lots of emerging PPA markets, I would say. Demand really increasing all over Europe, but the supply side indeed is quite different in the European markets. Now, just transitioning to the next topic, as I really would like to discuss it and take the time for it, is the current market situation, which has been quite different to what we would have seen a year or two ago, and the major change here is the power prices have been extremely high, really starting off in late summer last year, with gas prices starting to increase, and the situation obviously has become much more dramatic since the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and prices really skyrocketing. We also see the forwards power price still being extremely high, even for forwards in 2024, 2025, which from our perspective are less fundamentally driven, but rather are reflecting the uncertainty and the volatility in the market in general. So since PPA prices are usually and oftentimes kind of priced on the basis or looking at the forward prices, that leads to PPA prices actually being really high for the moment. So how have you perceived the current market situation? How has this affected the willingness to close PPAs from the two sides of the market?
Yeah, thanks for that introduction to a very interesting topic as well. We are seeing extremely high prices in the market, as you laid out, and that also obviously impact levels of the level of PPA price points as well. I think there are a couple of dynamics that are interesting to notice. So from the buyer perspective, we're seeing that demand is still strong. And in fact, we ran a survey with some of our advisor partners in our most recent PPA price index report that said that 55% of our advisors' customers, they were aiming to keep their pace of sustainability procurement or renewable energy procurement, and 20% were aiming to increase the speed at which they procure renewable energy. So I think that's encouraging. And on the seller side, they have been more seeking sort of innovative contract structures that better improve their ability to capture some of this higher value in the market. And those contract structures could be something like a delayed PPA start date, so where the developer might run the first couple of years on a merchant basis, and then the PPA price kicks in. It could be PPA offers with a shorter tenor, where, well, for the business case of the project, if they can sign a 5-year PPA or maybe even shorter, the business case is done. So that's what they're looking for. And other developers are looking for alternative pricing structures, like the market following pricing structure that allows them to capture the actually the merchant revenue, while potentially having the corporate agree to a floor price in case pricing turned down. So there's a lot of contractual stuff going on that is aimed to help keep the developers at the table rather than just sort of sell it in the market. And that what we would call merchant appetite is actually increasing pretty significantly. Not just, I think we saw it earliest in the Nordics, and we're seeing it particularly now in Spain as well. So that also is a bit of a challenge for the corporate buyers. So what can they do if they want to get a PPA? They have to be what we call ready to transact, because things are moving really fast. The demand is strong. The developers have multiple avenues. They can sell to a couple of corporates. They can sell to a utility, or they cannot sell at all. And so if you're a corporate fighting for that project or for the power from that project, you have to be able to move at speed, and you have to be also prepared to potentially accept some terms and conditions that you would not have had to agree to a couple of years ago, or even a year ago. The thing that's helping drive demand from buyers is this notion, so where, and I've been one, so I feel I can say this with some comfort. So if you've been sort of an energy procurement manager, been used to seeing energy prices in Europe being low and relatively flat, what's happened over the past 12 months has really been an eye opener for lots of companies in their risk management policies. So now we're seeing, and you mentioned this before, lots of price hedgers, going to market, or at least that has become another driver for the PPA demand. So I think in short, the demand remains strong. The willingness from corporate buyers to engage in PPA contracts remains strong. And from the developer side, although they have challenges in their supply chain and all of that, and cost of their components, there's also a great deal of uncertainty there. They're also willing to transact, and they are, acting rationally and hoping to capture some more of that near-term high revenue that's available in the wholesale market, and I think that's where the meat of the negotiations take place at the moment, is how do you sort of allocate and make everybody happy with the current market situations. But the good news is that PPAs are being done, and there's willingness on both sides. You might want to call this more of a seller's market than you would have certainly a year ago, and I know that can mean different things to different people. But when we look at it, we think about, okay, when we're in a room with a developer and a buyer, and the developer, many developers over and over again, tell us, how many different opportunities they have to go to market. That's not, that was not the situation a year ago or further back. So I think that power has shifted a little bit, and that's natural. And buyers then will have to figure out a way to manage that if they want to secure a PPA.
Yeah, I would agree to that. So I think the kind of the general ambition to keep on track, I would say, on the decarbonization path for a lot of these corporates is definitely there. However, they really struggle with these very high prices for the moment, and so the reality is that the prices are really driven by these enormously high gas prices and the crises, but the prices will go down again eventually, as soon as the LNG market will develop in the next coming years, with terminals being built in Europe, with the general kind of supply side on the global gas market will diversify more, with countries such as the US and Qatar building up that LNG capacity. So we expect the prices to go down kind of around 2024, 2025. Again, when you close a PPA today, most of them, start power delivery in 2024, 25. And so I see a lot of interest from market participants to either look at fundamental price forecast to price PPAs, or as you were saying, indeed, rather than to fix a PPA price on the basis of the current forward prices, which would lead to a very high price for these long-term contracts, right? You wouldn't want to close a 10-year PPA on the basis of these incredibly high prices. So there's much more willingness to either go for a merchant index, spot price indexed PPA structure, shorter tenors, as you would say, in order to then close a PPA when the prices are lower. So definitely a lot of movement in the market in terms of in terms to make it happen. The fixed price 10-year tenor PPA is currently kind of not the favorite market structure I see in the market currently.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I enjoy to see this innovative spirit, and as I talked about in the very beginning, like that's a theme for Europe, and it's great to be part of that. It doesn't mean that it's always easy, and it is indeed difficult to get transactions closed at the moment for all the reasons you've just highlighted and reiterated. But it is still happening, and it's fun to be a part of.
Fully agree to that. It's a really exciting space to be active in. Looking at the clock here, kind of, it was slowly coming to an end of the show. But before we ended off, we like to play a small game which we called Overrated, Underrated, where we get a couple of really snappy short answers on a couple of statements. So if you're up to that game, so the first one would be kind of PPA as a tool for decarbonization for corporates in Europe. Is that underrated or overrated in your perspective?
PPAs, I think it's underrated now and has been in the past, right? The thing that may concern me is how will we look at it in the future when if everything goes merchant. But as long as there are still developers out there that benefit from from a PPA contract with an off taker, then highly underrated, and we should have more of those.
Okay, and what about the 24/7 movement? Underrated or overrated?
I think it's underrated, and I know that a lot of people will not agree. It's just a game for the big tech and all of that. But when I was a corporate buyer in 2016, our supplier came to us with that idea, and we started to think about it, and that was early days. But since then, I've actually been inspired by the notion that should be the ultimate ambition. And sure, it's difficult, not to say impossible in many places, and it would be extremely costly to get there. But I think the notion and the ambition over the next 5 to 10 years should be to move ambitious companies in that direction. And that's also to say that LevelTen is working on software tools to help that. But and maybe I'm biased from that perspective, but I do think it's an interesting notion. Yeah, absolutely underrated.
Yeah, interesting. I actually see the other way around. I have to admit, I think it's putting ambitions very high at a situation where we're currently trying to ramp up the market and enable the market for a lot of market participants that might not be looking for 24/7 right now, but are looking to close first deals and getting to know the market. So it's interesting that you have a different view on that one. So the third one is, and we touched briefly upon it at the start of the podcast, is virtual PPAs for Europe. Is it underrated, overrated? Where's it going?
I think it's underrated. It's a fantastic product. It's not a product for everybody, and some people will have heard me say that before. But there's a lot of there's some complexity. It's a difficult product to access. It's not so. At LevelTen, we'd like to work for giving everybody the ability to participate in this market and be able to procure renewable electricity in an impactful way, and even though it doesn't have to be on a 24/7 basis, but at least we want to give as many corporates access to this market as possible, and the PPA is not the greatest tool for that. But if you are among the companies that have the size and the scope and the financial capabilities to take on this type of product, then yeah, it's a great product and a great tool.
Yeah, it makes a lot of things easier in the end, right? So especially for corporates that have activities around Europe with lots of different sites, actually cross-border virtual PPAs can be a really good way of bundling the power needs. So it's interesting to see kind of the really increased interest in virtual PPAs in Europe.
Yeah. Just on that, actually, if I may. So
sure.
So I fully agree. Like the biggest obstacle that we've seen in the past towards this contract structure that actually offers a lot of benefits is the accounting complexity, and we're seeing more and more IFRS accounted companies that are getting comfortable with what they have to do in order to manage that complexity, and I think that's encouraging. That's all I'll say. I think that's encouraging.
That's really funny, because my next one would have been the complexity of PPA transactions. Is it underrated or overrated? So you took it away from me. So it's not the accounting only; it's also the legal structure more generally. So,
but that's still underrated.
Do market participate still overestimated in that sense, or underestimate the complexity of PPA transactions?
I think the market participants are pretty well aware that this is a complex structure, and I still think it's somewhat underrated. I would love to see this, and hopefully someday we'll get there, that this become a contract structure that can be a 4-page document signed by the chief procurement officer or someone at that level, rather than this having to be an 8 months process with extensive transaction costs and approvals up to CFO, CEO, and sometimes board of director level. I think it's still underrated how complex it is, but most organizations that we're in touch with, they are aware of that when at least when we get to speak to them. Yeah. So that's my position on that.
Yeah, it's I fully agree. It's still very much bilateral contracts, and really different on every PPA transaction that we're seeing in the market. So to end it off light, last but not least, as you would say, kind of Danish beer. Is it overrated or underrated, Flemming?
Oh, that's a good one. You're gonna get me in trouble here. So Danish beer is underrated. I thoroughly enjoy a chilled pilsner, and there are some companies in Denmark that make very, very nice pilsners, and probably they might be the best in the world. Who knows?
Yeah, growing up in Belgium, I might have to ramp up my Danish beer knowledge a little bit. Interesting.
We should get together and exchange tastes, I guess.
Yes,
and views.
Definitely. Listen, Flemming, thanks you so much for being my guest on the show today. It was a really pleasure to talk to you. Today we covered the recent trends on power purchase agreements, talking about the different European markets and the role LevelTen is playing to ramp up the PPA market in Europe. Flemming, thank you so much for being a guest on my show today.
Thekla, it was my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me and LevelTen to the table. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was Thekla von Bülow, Principal for Commission Projects at Aurora's Berlin office, talking to Flemming Sørensen, Vice President Europe at LevelTen Energy. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening and goodbye.